Welcome to episode 3 of Media Conversations with Malik Cooper. I am your host, Malik Cooper, and joining me today is a veteran play-by-play broadcaster, Charles McNeil. How are you doing today, sir?
Good, Malik. Good. Thank you so much for having me.
Thanks for joining the show. You and me met about 10 months ago when you were doing play-by-play for the Battle at the Rock basketball game between BFL Prep and Lake Norman Christian. So my first question is how did you get into sports broadcasting and specifically play-by-play?
Well, my desire initially as a 16-year-old was to get into play-by-play in some way, shape, or form. I loved sports as a kid. Of course, I played all sports, even hockey. Played football, basketball, baseball, Little League, and all of those. And then in high school, I played basketball, and we had a bowling team in my high school as well. So I bowled and I played basketball. I went to a small private school in Jersey City, New Jersey, called the Bergen School. It's now has been closed permanently, but it was a great educational opportunity. I grew up in the hood, although you might not be able to tell it the way I speak, but I grew up to give people some perspective. If you know any neighborhood, you'll know Martin Luther King Drive or Martin Luther King Boulevard. In our case, it was Drive, was on one corner and Ocean Avenue was on the other corner. And so I saw growing up in the 60s, I grew up seeing, the transition with the race riots and all of that. And that kind of helped shape me for who I was and who I wanted to be. And so at 16, I decided I wanted to be a play-by-play announcer. I didn't know how to go about it. And I had a cousin who was playing for the Indiana Pacers. His name was Mel Bennett. And Mel was a reserve for the Pacers. Back in the day, they had transitioned from the ABA to the NBA. And I went to a Knicks game. And because Mel had gotten us tickets, we were, not far from the floor. We were probably maybe 15 rows up or so. And back then, Marv Albert, who was the play-by-play voice, and many of y'all know Marv Albert, yes! And, the spectacular move and all of those kinds of things. Marv was the play-by-play guy for the Knicks before he became the national television announcer for TNT and some of the other entities. So Marv was at the game. They had their booth set up actually in the stands. They had carved out about 3 rows in the stands, put a table there, and he and his sidekick, I don't remember who the color analyst was, were there. So we were there a lot early because we wanted to see shoot around. There wasn't a whole lot of fans there as well. So we rolled in, we sat down, and I said, "That's Marv right there." And I walked on down and I told him I was going to get his position. I was going to take his job in a few years. And he laughed it off and said, "Yeah, right, kid," like that. And then I asked him politely, I said, what would it take for me to get there? And he told me to go to a school, pick a college of my choice, concentrate on either communications or broadcasting, and then focus on that, try to get an internship after my second year, and then work toward my trade. Any opportunity I had to volunteer my services, just make myself available so I could be seen, and then maybe have an opportunity to be a play-by-play guy.
So Marv was what inspired you at an early age to get into the field?
Yes, yeah, he was my early inspiration. He, along with Dick Schaap, who you may or may not know, the late Dick Schaap, did the sports reporters on ESPN. He was one of my inspirations. Dick Enberg was another one. He was one of my idols as far as play-by-play guys. I loved his style. Very smooth, very relaxed. Keith Jackson. Oh, Nelly, Keith Jackson was the guy who did college football back in the day. So those guys were really, really inspirational for me. But we didn't have anybody that looked like me, doing games at that time. And I didn't really see that, even though I grew up in the hood and I knew, obviously, going up to a private school, that there were folks of other races. It was just I didn't see it as being a different for me personally. I just saw it as another step in the evolution, and that eventually I would get a chance. I didn't look at any obstacles because, again, I grew up in the New York, New Jersey area. So up there, you didn't see the obstacles that folks in the South may have seen in their existence. And I just strived to be the best I could be. So upon high school graduation, I got accepted into my college of choice, which was in upstate New Jersey, and went there for, my matriculated there, my undergrad, came out, and when I graduated, I knew I needed to find a job. So I came south, where my family's from, got a job in radio initially as a DJ. I was actually playing the best of everything, the 50s, 60s, 70s, and 80s music. And upon playing that for about 6 months, I said, no, that's not what I want to do. I want to get into sports, and I found the home that I was living in, the apartment I lived in, they were doing high school football games of the week. So this was in Southern Maryland. Actually, ironically, my name's Charles. It was in Charles County, Maryland. So Waldorf in particular. And I wound up going there and saw a guy doing the games, and I thought he did a good job, but I, felt like I was ready to have that next step. So I asked him if he would mind if I, stepped in and did play-by-play. Little did I know, as I was, belittling his skills, that he was going to be my future boss. And he hired me. He said, if you can go ahead and sell the advertising that goes along with the games, you're hired. And so I made myself a salesman and a play-by-play guy at the same time. And I started doing games for a number of schools, including Lackey High School and a number of others there in that town and in that community, and did that for about 3 years, and then got my big break working for BET and Sports News Network. And so in the late 80s or early 90s, I got a chance to work for Sports News Network, which was a budding national entity. They started off with about 15,000 subscribers and grew it to over 11 million subscribers in like a year. And so they were like the ESPN News or Sports Center 24 hours a day. It's probably the best way to give you an analogy of what they were. And I worked with some really talented people there behind the scenes. I was the overnight producer. Then from overnight producing, I became a guy that went out and volunteered his time. So I would go to basketball games in DC. I would go to Baltimore for baseball games. I would go to Redskins, excuse the expression, they were the Redskins back then, go to Redskins games and cover those guys, and come back with my footage and do a stand-up while I was there. And they would allow me to mix those things together to turn in packages that we would actually run during the newscast. And so I got some experience on, although it was voluntary, got a chance to get some experience there. And then in addition to that, I was also putting my hat in the ring in other places like BET, and through going to BET every week consistently. I think every week I went there for about 2 months. And then finally, the people who were coming in and out every Friday saying, who is this guy in a suit that's here every week? One of them stopped and asked me, why I was there, because I've been trying to get in. And they said, yeah, we'll bring you in on a Saturday. You can sit down and watch some black college football, kind of figure things out. And then they allowed me to be an associate producer and then a producer. And then eventually I got hired as a play-by-play guy. So my first national play-by-play was at BET, doing black college football and basketball and boxing.
Right. And on the topic of black representation with play-by-play announcers, before we left the Battle at the Rock basketball game, you and me had a conversation, and we discussed how you were once the play-by-play man of a pretty prestigious basketball program. So could you let our audience in on how that came about?
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting you asked, Malik, because and I do recall that conversation. It actually started off of the stuff that I was doing at BET. So I mentioned I did play-by-play. Charlie Neal was actually the play-by-play announcer. I was a sideline reporter for black college football. And then he, because of his schedule, was tied up and couldn't do, play-by-play for football and boxing at the same time. So he recommended to the powers that be to allow me an opportunity to be the play-by-play guy doing boxing. So I got up and, dressed in the tux and hooked up with a couple of guys from Philly, and we got together and did some big fights, including Bernard the Executioner Hopkins. He was one of our main events one night. I actually worked the fight with Mike Tyson at BET as well, which was a great thrill. And this is, as we roll into the 90s, this was an experience that who could imagine for a young guy under 30 getting a chance to, work on a national stage with Mike Tyson, Iron Mike, the real deal. And that was a unique experience that I have to tell you about it another time, because it's a lengthy story. But let's move forward to the college situation. So I'm working there, and because black college football was a very expensive entity to broadcast football back then, there wasn't streaming services. You had to come in with a full production truck, which was, hundreds of thousands of dollars to do. And then you have to offset that with advertising dollars. So BET decided to stop doing, their coverage of black college football at the time. It was very, very expensive, and focused more on the video programming and the music programming that was more lucrative and less expensive. And so I don't blame them for that. And so they stopped doing sports. So I was out of a job. And the Sports News Network entity that I mentioned moved from DC to New Jersey. And a few months into that, they were also out of business. So as a result of that, I was in need of a job. I was maybe 2 or 3 days removed from them padlocking the doors with the Sports News Network entity. And my uncle got a call, and he said, John Thomas from Georgetown has called, and he's interested in your services. So I'm like, John Thomas, who is that? So I pick up the phone and called the number he had given me, and they answered, Georgetown University Athletics. It didn't dawn on me that it was Coach Thompson, right? So I'm asking, who is John Thomas? And believe they said, who's calling? And I said, Charles McNeil. And they said, oh, you mean Coach Thompson? And I went, took a deep swallow, like, Coach. Okay, so to give you the backstory there, when I first started, I told you right out of school, I worked as a DJ, and then I started doing play-by-play. Well, while I was doing play-by-play at a company called DBF, it was a subsidiary of Jones Intercable, I used to travel to Georgetown and do some of their games, basically go up and get footage. I would bring a camera, film them, basically be a one-man gang, interviewer, cameraman, the whole 9 yards. So I go there, and sure enough, I'm sitting there talking to Coach Thompson. I'm talking to, Alonzo Mourning. I'm talking to that group, Dikembe Mutombo and that group of players. And while I'm talking to these guys, Coach Thompson is taking notice of it, unbeknownst to me. The one thing I can say was that I felt like I was the only one that during his time, of the reporters, that he really hadn't gotten into. Coach was notorious for really giving these guys the business if they didn't know what they were talking about when they would try to challenge him on his decision making during games, and he had never done that to me. So somehow he had taken notice of me. I guess he sought me out. He somehow found me in New Jersey, of all places, and gave me a phone call. So when he called, he says, I said, hey, Coach. You put him on the phone. He says, hey, Coach, how are you doing? He says, hey, boy, how are you? I said, I'm good, Coach. What's going on? And he says, we're in need of a play-by-play guy because our regular guy has been called up as an Army reservist. He's going to the Persian Gulf War, and we need somebody to replace him. And he says, have you ever done play-by-play? Well, at that point, the most I've done was some junior college stuff and then the high school games I was telling you about. So yeah, I had done a Maryland State Championship, and I had probably done, 4 or 5 junior college games, but I certainly had not done Division I college basketball. Now, again, I grew up in a city, Jersey City, that, produced Danny Hurley. We produced David Rivers, Roderick Rhodes, a number, Kyle Anderson, who's in the league right now. A number of players had come through our city. Jim Spinarkle, who's a broadcaster himself, Mike O'Corin as well. These guys are just a few of the people that came from Jersey City that actually played Division I ball at Duke and North Carolina and Kentucky and other places, and some won national championships along the way. And I had done their summer league games, but that's not, doing D1 ball, doing Christian Laettner versus Alonzo Mourning, which was the first game that I actually did as a test to see if I was capable of holding it down. And as fate would have it, they gave me that opportunity. I stepped in and was able to I guess, get their attention enough that they put us in an audition setting where I was there along with 2 other announcers that they were considering for the position. It was a scrimmage game, and I won out. They chose me. And so I had another opportunity that I was working on, which regarding the CBS coverage of the Olympics, the Winter Olympics. And it was a position where it would have actually been possibly some world travel involved. And coach asked me if I took the position, if I would, bypass anything else. And I promised him I would. Now, of course, I'm a man of my word. So we chose to take that opportunity to work with Georgetown. And it was a great experience. He told me going in that, should the play-by-play guy who had been there for a few years prior come back from the Persian Gulf War, he would retain his position. and I was willing to take that chance to, put my skills at the test and see if I was capable. And I learned a lot along the way.
For those listening who don't know, John Thompson, excuse me, he was actually a two-time NBA champion with my favorite team, Boston Celtics, before he became the coach at Georgetown. But he's best known, obviously, as the head coach of the Georgetown Hoyas, 6-time Big East champion and 3-time Big East Coach of the Year. What did it mean for you to be asked by a legend like him to take that position?
At the time, I didn't really realize the significance. I mean, obviously, I knew that coach had chose me, and it was a great opportunity, and I was going to work my hardest to impress him and impress the school. But I don't think it has had as much impact as it has now that I'm in my later years, to look back on it and think, hey, I was, 29-year-old young man just getting started in the business, and, coach chooses me out of all the people who have been covering the team for years and years and years to give me a shot at being considered for this. And granted, it was only one season that I got it, because thank God Rich Schaap made it through. And I'm glad to say that Rich Schaap is still doing play-by-play. He's still at Georgetown. He's still doing the radio games. Here we are in 2022, and that was 1990 and 91, and he's still doing play-by-play. So he's been there for 40 years plus. And, I guess if there was anything that I would hope for down the road, would be maybe should he ever retire, that they would consider the only other guy that considered, that filled in for him during that time frame as the opportunity to kind of close out my career. That would be a great icing on the cake. But to answer your question, I honestly didn't, think a whole lot of it, other than I had to do a good job, and I was willing to do what was necessary to learn the trade, because again, there was a lot of things that I thought I knew that I learned as we were actually going on.
To ask the question from another angle, John Thompson is the first black head coach to win a major collegiate championship in basketball. So did it mean something different for you to get a recommendation from him, also knowing that play-by-play is also stereotypically not all that diverse of a field?
Yes, it did. It definitely did, and it does. Primarily because, yes, he was one who broke so many barriers, and I guess I was just one of those along the way, and this was the beginning of setting the stage for me to be, a trendsetter in that regard. I'm fortunate enough not only to be the first and only African American to broadcast as the play-by-play announcer at Georgetown basketball, but also in 1999, God blessed me with an opportunity to do the play-by-play for the world feed for the Masters. So I'm the only African-American to actually broadcast worldwide for the Masters to all the English-speaking countries outside the United States during the first round of the 1999 Masters. And that also came as an interesting story, which I'm sure we'll get to a little later on.
It's been about 17 months since John Thompson passed away, so I just wanted to ask you what your relationship with him was like, and how did you react to the news?
Well, it was certainly, Malik, it was certainly a devastating story. Bit of news that came to me. I think I was working at the time, and I got a text that he had passed, and I was stunned. I knew that he had some health concerns, but nothing can prepare you for, a guy that's like a father figure to come in, and then, and he leaves us, and it's sudden. So when I got the news, of course I shed a tear and thought back to, the story I told you earlier about the phone call that we had that kind of set the stage. And one thing I didn't tell you was, when I got the job, I was married, and he was like, this is coming sudden. So he's like, once you accept the position, our first games are, on the road and anything. If you need anything, you just let me know. And I got you, meaning, if my wife wanted to travel, or if I needed some items, because I may not have been prepared with coats or, outfits or what have you for the games that we had, because, we played in the Big East. So I had, at that point, I was in DC. It was a little bit warmer than it is in New York, New Jersey, Boston, Philly, Pittsburgh. So if you need anything, Connecticut, he's got you. And I think I felt like I had access to his credit card and things of that nature, which, again, father figure does that for his son, make sure that he's covered, and he certainly did that for me, so I was grateful.
Your run came in the late 80s, early 90s portion of Georgetown basketball, right?
Right.
So that's with people like Dikembe Mutombo, like you said, Alonzo, Mourning, and that crew. So can you tell the audience about some of your favorite moments covering that legendary group of basketball players?
Well, the first thing I can say that was really interesting for me, Malik, was the fact that during the season, we went to places that had not seen snow in like ever, and they got snow. I don't know if it was my influence being a Jersey guy working for Georgetown or what it was, but we went to St. Petersburg, Florida for a made-for-TV game, and it snowed.
In Florida?
We went to Houston, Texas, which of course they do get snow periodically, but not that often. They had an ice storm. Yeah, it was amazing. It seemed like the places we were going. We went to Las Vegas. Again, Vegas gets cold at times, and we were in Vegas. This was another made-for-television event, and that one stands out the most. It was Jimmy Jackson and Ohio State playing against Georgetown, and it was UNLV played in the doubleheader as well, and that was the Grandmama and Larry Johnson, of course, Grandmama, along with Greg Anthony and Anderson Hunt and Stacey Ogman and that group, the defending national champions. We got a chance to see them, and so this made for television doubleheader, and it was really cool because Dick Vitale was there, and so I'm working solo. I don't have a color analyst; it's just me. So I'm talking, as you can tell, I can talk. So I'm talking for about nonstop for 2 or 3 hours because I'm doing both games. They wanted both games on Armed Forces Radio, so our group had the rights to that. So we did the Georgetown game first, or maybe the other game came first. And Dick said, saw me sitting there. He says, looks like you need a little help. And he came over and he sat down for 5 minutes and jumped into my broadcast, which was really cool, unexpected completely. And it was, nice to be able to play off of him. And then there was another instance where I was doing a game and Dr. J comes in, and I don't remember what the location was, but Dr. J came into one of those made for TV events as well. And he sat down and visited with me. And then probably one of the highlights was, we went to Syracuse that year. And of course, it's a home and home. We beat them at our place. We go up to their place, and they're ready for us. 35,000 and some odd. It was the biggest crowd at that point ever at a Syracuse game. It is humongous. The dome, the Carrier Dome. You've got people on top of people, and no pandemic, so everybody's real happy. And of course, they're rooting against Georgetown. And Coach Boeheim and Coach Thompson, two great friends and longtime rivals. You got Coach Thompson with the towel, and you've got Coach Boeheim just, going at it. And they're just like meeting at half court, and they're going at it each other, and they're going after the officials. And it was a tremendous game that went down to the wire. And when the game ended, I'm sitting there, and of course, this young man hadn't made national attention as yet. But Mike Tirico comes over. Mike Tirico comes over from NBC Sports now, former ESPN personality, the Golf Channel, and all that. And he comes over and he taps me on the shoulder and he says, "Hey, just want to introduce myself. I'm the local news anchor for Syracuse TV, and he was actually one of the broadcasters of one of the local affiliates. And he said, I heard about your story. Just want to come over and introduce myself." And we met, like that. So that was a really cool experience. And then we closed things out. We lose the game against UNLV, closes out our season, second round of the NCAA tournament. So we just short of making it to the Sweet 16. And we're play Utah. We played Utah in the first round. Hanno Metala and that group. Hanno, I think, wound up being drafted by the Hawks. And so we beat them in the first round. We play UNLV in the second round. So we didn't play them in Vegas, but we wound up seeing them in the matchup in this one in Arizona, in Tucson. And they we were in the game, had gone down by about 16 or so. We came back and got in the game, got really close to about 6. And then we had freshman guards, 3 freshman guards, Joey Brown, Lamont Morgan, and Robert Churchwell. And those guys unfortunately turned the ball over a series of times, and we wound up, losing the game, and our season ended. But and for Dikembe, it was the end of his career. Alonzo still had 1 more year of eligibility, and he stayed on for his final year as well. But it was a great experience, and things that stand out for me. They had snow there in Tucson, another one of the places that they had not getting snow on a regular basis. So those are some of the memories that I have from Georgetown basketball.
So far we've talked about your meeting Marv Albert. You've met Dick Vitale. I was surprised that you said Julius Erving came in out of nowhere. Like, how does something like that happen? You seem to have met a lot of famous individuals in your career.
Yeah, I have. One of my favorite stories I think of all time is, I covered sports for a lot of years as I was trying to cut my teeth and figure out what direction I wanted to go. Do I want to be a sideline reporter, which I felt like was an easier job than a play-by-play guy? Because with play-by-play, you have to know the players, you have to know the pronunciations, you have to know the backgrounds, all of that stuff. When you're a sideline reporter, you basically, and it's no disrespect to sideline reporters, but you have to know, 2 or 3 stories that kind of cover the game. And then you have to know the sport enough to be able to cover the in-game things that happen, because obviously you're going to ask the coach a question or 2. As the way it's constructed now, you'll ask him, 2 questions, and at the end of a quarter or at the end of half, same thing at the end of the game or going into the 3rd quarter, that kind of thing. So it's not as extensive as it is being the play-by-play guy. So saying that, I had the opportunity to, do a number of games in which I met some really cool people, and I was trying to figure out what direction I wanted to be. So I'm covering a lot of games. One of the games I covered happened to be one, with Michael Jordan. And of course, covered several games with Jordan. But I'm in the locker room, and fun fact, I'm sitting in there, and this is the first time I've seen this. One of his, I think they were called bird dogs back in the day, but they were, guys that worked for the agent, and they made sure the players were taken care of, when they were on the road, because checks come when they come. I don't know if it's every 2 weeks or once a month, whatever. But guys are in need of money, and I see a guy come over, and he hands Jordan one of these bank envelopes, and he opens it up, and it's like a stack of hundreds, and I'm like, wow, this is pretty cool, And so this is, again, I'm covering the Washington team, and these guys are coming through Washington as I was with Sports News Network at the time. And then later I go in, and this is a couple of games before the playoffs. Actually, I think it might have been the last game of the regular season. There's a season in which Indianapolis comes in. It was actually the playoffs. It was a playoff game, and this is the Pacers team that has, has Reggie Miller on it. It's got, kind of loaded with some good guys. Mark Jackson's on the team as well. And so at the end of the game, they wind up losing to the Washington team, and he comes over. I come over and I ask him, I said, well, what would it take for you guys to make it to game 5 in this best of 3 series? I mean, best of 5 series. They're down 2-0 at the time. And he looks at me and he says, it's going to take the second coming of Jesus to sit down on the bench with us, Mary Magdalene. And he starts going on with his biblical references. And I'm like, I just got the sound bite of the year, So that was became my drive or determiner. One of my determining things that I really wanted to do was try to get these guys in a position where they gave me the ultimate soundbite. That they're talking to a variety of different people, and they're giving these canned answers. Yeah, man, both teams played hard, my man. Both teams played hard. The Rasheed Wallace thing, or they're saying something like you hear from the football players. But in this case, I got a solid soundbite. So when I got those bites. Now, I'm not the only one asking the questions, but, I'm the one who asked that question that got that answer. So I'm definitely running with it and trying to get it into every outlet that I can, that I feel I could take advantage of it. And I was able to make a couple extra nickels doing that, by farming it out to people that I thought would be able to take advantage of it. So that was one instance. There was another one in which I'm working in Charlotte by way of Asheville. I actually was the number 3 sportscaster in Asheville, North Carolina. And so I went down to cover the Charlotte Hornets' first playoff game. And this is Alonzo Mourning, who I know very well. It's Grandmama Larry Johnson, who I know somewhat well because, of course, they beat Georgetown. And it's Muggsy Bogues, played at Wake Forest. And so those 3 got them to the playoffs. Of course, they're playing your Celtics, first round of the playoffs. And they're preparing for that first round matchup. It's actually like the week leading in. So I'm spending basically the week down in Charlotte, just doing stories every day, doing live shots back to our station in Asheville. And so I had set up something with their PR people, and I said, okay, I'm going to try to sit down with Alonzo and the 3 big stars, and we're going to do a piece on what it means, the threesome getting to their big 3 getting to the playoffs for the first time in the team's history, and what will it take to win. So I got approval for all 3 guys, but Larry Johnson had gotten hurt in one of the last couple of games of the regular season, so he actually didn't practice that day. He's off on a side court, him and Johnny Newman, who used to play with the Knicks. He's a good shooter, kind of put you on the mind of Crawford or one of those 6th man of the year kind of guys, right? So they're shooting off to the side. They've got this, have a big screen up, so you can't really see what they're doing. You can see the shots going up, and they're playing one-on-one, but they're not participating in practice. So the practice ends, and I get Muggsy first. I go over to Alonzo. I get the interview with him, of course. We're joking about the Georgetown days. And I hear some ruckus. And you've been in this situation, I know, before, where you know something's going on behind you, but you can't look. I'm sitting there holding the camera here. Back then, we actually had a Porta-Pack, which was the actual tape inside of this thing that was, recording your interview. And it was an umbilical cord that was connected to it. So it was almost like having a VHS or a VCR attached to you, but a 40-pound VCR. And I'm sitting there shooting, and you might have to educate your viewers as to what a VCR is. But I'm videotaping these guys, and as I'm doing it, I hear what sounds like Larry Johnson's voice. I'm like, I can't believe this is him. So Alonzo is doing it, and I kind of glance over my shoulder, and sure enough, it's Larry Johnson. I'm like, this guy told me he wasn't doing any interviews today. So I turn around, I finish up with Alonzo, and I start walking over there. And as I'm walking over there, he can see the scowl on my face like, dude, you told me you're not going to do any interviews. And he stops what looks to be about 40 reporters wrapped around him. And he stands up and he says, big man, they bum rushed me, dude. They bum rushed me, man. I'm sorry, bruh. What do you need? Like that. And everybody parts to look back as to who it is. And it's me walking in, and he answers all my questions, and I get a chance to put my story together, file it, and get it in. So those were some of the highlights, in those years where I was trying to make that transition and figure out exactly what I wanted to do, whether it was being a newscaster, being a sideline reporter, or doing play-by-play that I'm doing now.
It seems like your relationship with them from their college days really had an impact, really, even into their NBA careers. So are you still in contact with them today?
Well, Alonzo, through his foundation, I do reach out to him about once or twice a year. He has a couple of fundraising events that, we stay in touch on. And the other guys, Dikembe, not so much. Larry Johnson, of course, and those guys, they're very busy with their schedules and family and everything like that. And, my schedule is picked up as well. So no, I haven't really stayed in touch with the Georgetown family at all in those times. There was probably maybe the first 15 to 20 years, but now we're talking 30 years since I did the Georgetown thing. So it's a lot of time has passed. So no, and a lot of people have moved on and or left us, like Coach Thompson. So, I've not done a whole lot of communicating with those guys in recent memory.
One other thing I have to ask, with you being involved with the Charlotte Hornets during that era, was did you ever get to talk to Delk, Curry, and or see Steph walking and shooting? Because, he's famous for having been around the team even during those years.
Yeah, if he was there, I don't recall it. And I want to say Dell probably came in right after. I mean, I covered the team for quite some time, so I was in, just to be full disclosure, I was in that market covering teams from. I left Georgetown in '91. I started there in the fall of '91. So Georgetown basketball, of course, ended in March, in the month of March. We didn't make it to the Final Four. So in month of March, and then I started my new job as the number 3 guy in Asheville with WLOS TV, the ABC affiliate there. And so I was there from 91 to 93, and then I moved to Augusta in 93 and have been here ever since. And I even covered because again, Augusta is in Georgia, but it's right across right on the edge of the East Georgia. So we're right there next to South Carolina. We're about 2.5 hours to Charlotte. So I was up there quite a bit. But I don't recall ever seeing Steph or Seth, for that matter. Yeah, I do remember interviewing Dell on a couple of occasions, but nothing really memorable came of that. I think it was just in the process of covering the team and game stories more so than anything else.
So I wanted to go back to, you talked earlier in this interview about being employed with BET, and you brought up Charlie Neal, who's the man known as the voice of HBCU sports, and he broadcasted at ESPN, but he was definitely best known for his 23 years with BET. So what did it mean for you to work with such a legend?
It was amazing. I mean, again, this is one of those situations that he sought me out, similar to Coach Thompson. And I guess all I can say for young broadcasters is I'm blessed. You know, if you do the right things and you don't treat people in a bad way, God finds a way to shine on you. And, I'm not perfect by any stretch of the imagination, but I know that he rewards people who work hard and that, have a focus, of course, get on their knees regularly and tell him what they want. And if it, it's in his time that it'll come your way. But I've been fortunate that it's come sooner rather than later. And I tell everybody all the time, I've had the pleasure of being a play-by-play guy for Georgetown. And I didn't mention this earlier, but they were one of my favorite teams. In this room, as you can see, it has a little blue. It has a little light blue in there. I'm a North Carolina fan, but I'm also a Georgetown fan. And somewhere over my shoulder is my Georgetown, I think it may be just behind this microphone, but there's a Georgetown towel. I think I've got a couple other things. I've got the Go Hoyas little megaphone in this room. And, those are part of the things that I loved. When I was a freshman or sophomore in college, I had the ultimate experience. It's March Madness. I've got my own dorm. And at my school, we actually had apartments. And me and my roommates got together and had a national championship party, Final Fours and the national championship party. And it's Georgetown and North Carolina. It's Michael Jordan against Sleepy Floyd and Georgetown. That group, Patrick Ewing and those guys, played against North Carolina for the national championship, James Worthy and all those guys. And I'm sitting there having a party watching them play the national title. So I wore a Georgetown hat and I had a North Carolina shirt and thoroughly enjoyed it. And so to be able to be the play-by-play guy for your favorite team is amazing. And to answer your question as it relates to Charlie, I met Charlie Neal through the travels of doing the doing the BET things with black college football. And he was always on the road when we were doing the games, and I was there remotely, but he had heard good things. And so we had an opportunity. I mentioned Sports News Network at the top of our interview, and Sports News Network was an entity that, if it was still around today, folks would have loved it because we had some first-class talent. We had former ESPN announcers. We had some local announcers. Kurt Menefee was a guy who's doing NFL football and baseball. Kurt Menefee was one of our announcers. Kurt Menefee, that's at Fox. He was one of our junior announcers. He was an anchor back then. And I didn't know Kurt going into it, but got a chance to meet him during that experience. I helped because I was working overnights. I helped to put together the highlights that were aired in his shows in the early morning, and he was one of the guys that filled in for us. But because of what Charlie stood for, I reached out to him and asked him if he would be interested, because they were looking for some, minorities to be a part of it. And I reached out to him and, put him in contact with the people. They negotiated, and Charlie came over and actually anchored for Sports News Network for a while. And then while he was doing that, he brought over, he and Doug Williams became friends. And of course, he and Doug and I had a good history as well. So when Doug wrote the book Quarter Black, I thought that would be a good reason for him to come over and promote the book. So I reached out to Doug as the associate producer for SNN and brought him in, and then introduced him to Charlie. And then next thing you know, he and Charlie are doing BET games together as play-by-play and color analysts when Lynn Barney retired. So, it was all about working together. I thought the coolest thing, though, of all of this, Malik, is Charlie Neal. Of course, he's Charlie Neal. I'm Charles McNeil, as you can see. He's N-E-A-L. I'm N-E-I-L. But Neal, or McNeil, stands for son of Neal. So if you think about it, even though it's different spelling, he was another godfather of mine that brought me in, and like I said, handpicked me and gave me that opportunity. So I couldn't be, happier. And ironically, I'm doing black collar sports now as well. So, and have done it over the years.
Next, I wanted to ask, you're a play-by-play man. That's one of the many things that you've told me that you've done throughout your career. I wanted to ask what you want in a color partner. Or what do you think makes a great color partner? Because you've worked with all these great individuals. You talked about meeting Mike Tirico when he was younger and things of that nature. So what do you think makes a great color partner for you?
Okay, so obviously on television, the color analyst is the man. On radio, the play-by-play guy is more the man, primarily because you can't see it. So on radio, I've got to describe everything that happens from the time the ball gets inbounded to a bucket being made. The color analyst pops in, and he has about 4 seconds to get his point across on what he liked about the play and or did not like the play before the play evolves into another series of events that will lead into a shot or a made shot or a foul or, whatever occurs in that instance. And so the color analyst takes a secondary role in that. So it's important for the color analyst not to overstep their bounds over the play-by-play guy in a radio environment, or for you guys to have great synergy. I'll give you 2 examples. I did the Nike Peach Jam, which is a big event that we have here in Augusta. I did one of the earlier years events, and I did a game with a coach, a good friend of mine, Sam Lilly. I'm sure he wouldn't mind me telling you. Sam was a former NFL player for the Eagles, the Giants, primarily during his 5 or 6, 7 years in NFL career. But he was also a good basketball player in high school in this area, and a former high school coach that led a team to a state championship on the South Carolina side, and took another couple of teams from private school ranks and public school ranks in Georgia to a deep run. So Sam and I happen to be doing, because I'm the announcer for the sports radio station here in town doing games. I got the opportunity to go in and do the championship game to the folks here in Augusta back in the day. And this is the All Ohio team that's still a very strong program to this day. LeBron James was actually scheduled to play on that team. To give you some perspective as when it would have been LeBron's junior year, but he had a leg injury and was unable to play. So they had one point guard, which was their star player, and he wound up going to Oklahoma. I forget the young man's name, but he had a really strong career at Oklahoma. And you had the New York team, and again, I know they had kids from St. Raymond's, which is one of the stronger programs in the public school ranks. Catholic school ranks in New York. But one of the guys was Cindiana Gaines, who wound up going to Georgia, and then another young man who wound up going to St. John's. Those were the 2 lead guards. So the game comes down to the final seconds. Again, just to finish telling you, the play-by-play guy and the color guy have to be in sync. Comes down to the last second. And this is Coach Lilly's first game as a color analyst. I brought him in because he's my boy, and I had to put him down. He just won a state championship. We got to have some fun. So we're doing the game, and I'm calling it at 17 seconds, and they got the ball. New York has the ball. They're down by 1. They're dribbling to the right side. They bring the ball in the right wing corner. It comes back up to the top of the circle. They launch the shot. The shot goes up, and I'm about to call New York as the champion as the ball goes in, and Sam yells out, "Ha ha 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 ha!" He's excited because they won the title. And it just blows out everything that I said, because you can't hear me, because I did it at 3, he did it at 15. So so that particular tape was lost. One of those things, you're not going to send that off to anybody because they can't hear you call the championship. So that was one instance. And then ironically, 2 years later, and I said he had won the championship, he actually won the championship 2 years later, coaching a team called Silver Bluff here, South Carolina. I think it was a single A or double A state championship, and they played a team that had the number 1 scorer, Calhoun Falls, the number 1 scorer in South Carolina that year. Young man wound up going to the University of South Carolina. His dad had played and was one of the top scorers there, and young man was averaging like 35 points a game. So in the game, it was back and forth. His team, Coach Lilly's team, actually had a 6'8" kid who was a Division I prospect as well. And with about 12 seconds left, the 6'8" prospect goes up, and on a follow-up, his hand is that much over the rim. He tap dunks it, and they take the lead. So now you know who's getting the ball. The top scorer in the state's getting the ball with a chance to win. So they come down the floor, across the timeline. Again, 10 seconds. 8, 7, 6. He elevates with the three-pointer for the win. And my color analyst, who in this particular instance is the late Mo Dixon, Big Mo Dixon. Big Mo was the morning drive guy at ESPN Radio in Clemson, South Carolina. This is just prior to Clemson beginning their meteoric rise to being, an outstanding program before Dabo got there. But they were still a really good program in the early 2000s. And so Mo and I are doing the game. And again, another guy that I knew and thought they would do a great job, brought him in as the color analyst. And he yells out, "And they win! They win! The shot is good!" So he takes over my role. So again, another one that didn't make it to anybody else's training table. The game prior to that was solid. The play-by-play I thought was really good. Our connection. But yeah, the color analyst has to stay in their lane. In essence, is what I'm saying. When you do a game on radio, on television, it's just the opposite, Malik. Where on television, the color man is the guy. The color man comes on, and they are the storyteller. They know the backgrounds of the players. They know the insights from the coaches. They're either a former coach or former player, and their job is basically to take what they see and bring it to life in terms of the athleticism, the capabilities of these players, the form, if they're using the proper form or not, the agility, the mobility, the camaraderie, the teamwork, all of those adjectives. They bring those things together and say, hey, this is what this person is doing, this is what this team is doing, and bring it to light in that regard. So I take a more of a subservient role. My job there is basically just to set the stage. What are the team's records? What are their what the importance of this game? What's the importance of this game? And then as the game goes on, I'm jumping in and just saying things like I'm calling the play-by-play as the baskets are scored, but you can see it. So I tend to do a little bit of play-by-play like as if I would for radio, but I table it because the score is on the bottom third of the screen. There's no need for me to tell you the score. Best I can tell you is it's a 7-0 run or 6-0 run, something like that. And I may tell you about a player's, scoring. If someone's leading the team in scoring, they've got 17 and they've averaged 15, or if they go to the line, that's more me. But during the back and forth, I tell all my color analysts, even if you're on a point that's about the preceding play, continue with that thought all the way through. I can always recap on the back end and say, Malik Cooper scored that last field goal. He's got 15 now. And then we'll come back to the other end. So it's more about them and less about me.
Which one of the two do you prefer? Do you prefer radio where the play-by-play man sort of takes over like you talked about, or is it the TV side that you prefer?
I like both. I actually like both, and I don't think I have a preference. I enjoy if the color analyst is doing, his thing and he's rolling. I'm happy, because again, I've worked with some really talented color analysts. I mentioned Mike Tyson, who was inexperienced at the time that we did it. It was a lot of fun. One of my favorite stories there, Mike Tyson and I are doing a boxing event, and Tony TNT Tubbs, the former heavyweight champion of boxing, and if you could ever pull up the archives of this, you'll get a big laugh. But Mike, talks about the fact that Tubbs had come in a little bit overweight, and he just talked about his weight being not what Mike was used to when he used the word regurgitating. And so that was, you can imagine Mike saying regurgitating, and in other words along those lines. It was I won't go into the impression right now because I wouldn't do it justice, but it was pretty funny. And then I worked really recently with Tony Delk, who I thought was a really solid color analyst, and did one of the battle games recently with him, with Monty Bates and Mikey Williams, the big matchup in high school basketball last season. And so, that was really a good ride because he knows the kids inside now, having trained many of them. And then not only that, but we also, were able to chop it up and talk about his career. And then he just, it was easy. It was very easy. If you got a color analyst that's been around, has done these things before, it works out real well. I did a football game with Juice Williams, Isaiah Williams, that was quarterback at Illinois, brother who did it real big. We did Arch Manning's game, Archie Manning's grandson, and Peyton and Eli's nephew. So being around those guys and they know how to handle things and what their role is, and that, like I said, it just makes my life easier. And then when I work with the color analysts in basketball, I've got a couple of guys that I work with here. One of them is a coach at one of the high schools here, and the other is one of the former stars at the college games that I do. They respect my role as a play-by-play guy. They're both trying to learn the color analyst role, and so we're able to kind of mesh and coexist in that environment and have a good time.
Let's stay on the topic of high school sports for a minute, because I will also wanted to get into how, in your opinion, social media has changed the game for these young stars. We talked about Mikey Williams, you brought up Mikey Williams just now for another game that he did, and the game that I was at that you were at was Mikey Williams versus Paolo Banchero, who's a top 5 prospect for the NBA draft now, but now with the NIL coming into play and all things of that nature, young stars are becoming more and more and more like professional stars in that they have these huge, massive fan bases, and Mikey Williams is up to 3.5 million followers now. So I just wanted your opinion on what it means for young stars today to basically be superstars by the time they're in their mid-teens when you're covering the game.
I love it. I mean, I could only imagine what it would have been like, if Allen Iverson had that opportunity back in his day. If Michael Jordan, maybe not in high school, but certainly in his freshman year at college, knocking down the shot that would win the national championship, what kind of impact would that have had in his maturation in NIL situation? I couldn't fathom to imagine what it would have been like if all things were even. I love it because I think that, it to some extent it forces our youngsters to kind of think more about business. That we as parents, and I'm a parent of two, a young man and a young lady, what we talk to them all the time. My wife and I talk to them all the time about social media and the things that you post there, and it follows you throughout your career, so it's beyond just making a post and, I was just, in a mood, or I was just, something was going on in my life. It's you got to think seriously about everything that you put out there, because that's your brand. And so I think that in those regards, it definitely helps them to gain some more or earlier maturity, and or be more accountable for their decisions at a younger age. And then for the companies, preferably they won't take advantage of these youngsters, put them in a position where they're not, that they're not being able to live their best lives. Because again, I think again, you're put in a position where you get the riches from doing it. Now, what do you do with that? How does that impact you and how you go about, your day to day? So I feel like that the young people definitely have an advantage that my generation and the generation that came after me and after that didn't have. But again, life has evolved a lot since then. There's a lot of things I never thought I would see. This is certainly one of them, and now that it's here, and especially in Mikey's case, I think that it has kind of put that professional mentality on youngsters at an early age, and now they have to make the right decisions. And I think that the world is adapting to it. College sports is adapting to it with the transfer portal that exists now. I think that's due in large part for the same situation where people can move around and be free. The colleges have benefited from their talents in the past and have reaped the rewards of all of it. Now they get a chance to get a piece, and I think that they're well deserved.
And does that added maturity and responsibility that you talk about that younger players coming up in this generation have to have, does that positive outweigh the general notion that there's a whole crowd of people out there that sort of prefer college sports the way it was when you had just started or when you were at Georgetown, where you talked about how Dikembe left and Alonzo took his final year of eligibility? People used to stay in college for 3 and 4 years and get nothing for their services, basically. And now all that's changed. And some people think that it's tainted the purity of the sport in their opinion. So which side of the ledger do you fall in that sense?
Okay, so on that side, I definitely fall on the side of the player, because I think in terms of other sports where this is not the case, in golf, if you choose to come out and play golf and you're 17 or 18, whatever the eligibility year is for women or men, you're able to go and become a professional. If you're playing baseball, the same thing applies. If you decide to come out after high school, you can go straight into the pros and participate and get paid. So why not the same for football players and basketball players? They just happen to be, predominantly players of color, and so I think that they're deserving of that opportunity to move on to the next level. And I know that, colleges have benefited, and I'm not saying that they shouldn't, because they are giving a quality education, that there shouldn't be some level of benefit, but the players should be able to do more. And we've all known that, if you're dating somebody and you want to take them out and you have no money because school won't give you, is not able to give you anything without being in violation. You can't accept anything from a booster, but yet, you're scoring 20 points a game or 15 a game, or you're leading the conference and this, that, or the other, or you're just a member of the team that is a contributor in the morale of the team and the growth of the team. You should have some benefit from that.
Absolutely. I happen to agree with you there, especially when it comes to colleges benefiting from just jersey sales and all the different ways that you can use a player who's known nationally's name to promote your program. But is there any final thoughts on your career that you wanted to share with us? Because you've gone into so many things throughout this expansive career of yours, and I'm just amazed at the people you've met and the experiences you've had. So is there anything else you want to share with me before we wrap things up?
I mean, it's really amazing to me, Malik. First of all, thank you so much for having me. I'm thrilled that you thought enough of me to ask me to be a part of this. And I wish you nothing but the best with your podcast. And if ever you need any help, I'm right here for you. I know that you and others like you are our future. So my dad always told me, be nice to the people you meet on the way up, because they're the same folks you're going to meet on the way down. Treat others the way you want to be treated. And so my desire is always to kind of let my brand be that of someone who When you see me on air, I'm the same person you're going to see when you hang out with me. Maybe a little bit less buttoned up, but still having a good time and enjoying it. I love sports. So I guess that's the primary thing I'd say when you ask the question of, something else I want folks to know. I love sports. I've been passionate about sports since I was probably 6 or 7 years old, maybe 8. And, I followed everything. I followed, and I mentioned hockey at the top. I actually played hockey, in the recreation and parks department in Jersey City. I was the only African-American playing back in the 60s. I had to take 3 buses to get there. 5:45 in the morning was the game time, so I had to leave at like 4:15 from my side of town. And I made it a point to get there. I got my parents to buy me skates. Didn't know how to skate. I got out there and skated and learned. And within my first season, I made the All-Star team, which wasn't a major accomplishment because, I was like 9 years old. But still, it was a really cool thing to have done. And so just to speak to my love of sports. So I love all sports. And I look forward to, being able to continue to do this for a while. I'm talking about, now I'm getting close to retirement. I'm a couple of years away from retirement from my full-time job. I work in sales. So that's the other piece I guess I need to let everybody know, that sometimes the sports thing can't be a full-time vocation for you, a vocation for you. So what you can do is, find a way to use your spare time to be involved in it. Whether it is being the public address announcer, which I do for a semi-pro team here. They have a men and women's team that play in the ABA. They're called the Georgia Soul. So I do that to kind of keep my skills sharp. I host trivia, as you and I were talking about. I do that on Thursday nights just before we, tape this recording. I was hosting trivia for 6 teams from San Francisco to Chicago to Texas to New Jersey and here in Georgia and South Carolina. We have we just try to keep our skills sharp, because as you're keeping your skills sharp and talking, it helps you to be prepared when you come on and do things. You got to think fast. Things happen with technology. We do our trivia on Zoom. I'm doing games now at my home. There's a couple of entities that are doing games from the house. If you have a skill set that can do that, there's a couple of groups in Atlanta and one in Chicago that actually will hire you to do games. And you sit at home, they send you the rosters, they have live stats there, and you can project it to your smart screen, do the audio into your phone, and it goes live out on the air on a YouTube feed. It's a really cool entity. So I do that when time permits, but just continue to do as many games as you can. Watch yourself, meaning watch your replays, be hard, be a real strong, critique of yourself, and then learn to fall away from the things that are pet peeves. I'll take you back to the beginning and make it rapid fire here. So when I first started, one of the things I used to say was, of course. That was my pet word if I got stuck. So I would say things like, Georgetown seeking their 5th win of the season. Of course, they are second in the region and the conference, in the Big East Conference. Of course, Alonzo Mourning happens to be their leading scorer, but I was transitioning because I was looking for my next set of things to talk about. Now, after 35, nearly 40 years of broadcasting, I can sit back and I literally can go into a game not having looked at anything. In some instances, no pregame prep at all. And as long as I have the rosters there and I have some semblance of knowledge of the players, I can craft and open just because I can jump in live and do it. That's not my intention, but sometimes schedules, because I am in sales and other things, I don't have a chance to do a deep dive on certain games, and I just come in and kind of, with the high school games in particular, I can come in and wing it. I know who the starting players are, I know their skill sets and things like that, and jump in and do it. So I would say just, continue to get as many games as you can. We call it, almost like being a pilot, logging some time behind the wheel of I guess it's not really a wheel, but in the cockpit, log as many miles as you can and get those games in, and then farm your stuff out to people. Let people see you. Don't take no for an answer. Continue to send things. And if you're young, and especially like yourself, that's eventually going to leave, once you wrap up your college career, one thing that was told to me, and it was great advice, James Brown of CBS Sports gave this to me some years ago. He said, go to a place that you feel most comfortable in, a part of the country, a particular city. Send your resumes everywhere there, and tell the people that you're coming that you're going on vacation to their city and you would like to be able to come in. I know they may not have an opening now, but you'd like to come in and just spend a couple of minutes with them, get to know them, so that if there is an opening down the road, that they can give you some consideration. And when I got the job in Asheville, and eventually got the job in Augusta, it was by virtue of a trip that I took from DC, following the Georgetown experience, going all the way to Miami, and then driving back up from Miami. I sent my resumes down to Miami and drove back and stopped, both going down and coming back, in Virginia, in North Carolina, in Georgia, South Carolina, and Florida. And upon coming back, I got an offer to work in Asheville, and eventually got an offer from one of the people that I interviewed in Augusta after I spent 2 years in Asheville to come here, and then the rest is history.
Some great, amazing advice there from Charles McNeil. Thank you all for listening, and thank you once again for joining me on episode 3 of Media Conversations with Malik Cooper. You can follow Charles McNeil's career on Twitter at C McNeil Sports, capital C, capital M, and capital N. And for more content like this from me, you can follow me on Instagram at Malik Cooper Media, or on Twitter at MCMC Podcast. We'll see you on episode 4, and once again, great to have you on.
Thank you so much for having me.